Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another Marvel Snap video. Today we have the hot location Wakandan Embassy, and with Wakandan Embassy, when this location turns up, it is going to give +2 power to each of the cards in your hand. And so hot location days, those locations appear in 60% of the games that you're going to play, and so it is worth building your deck almost entirely around this location to get the most upside out of it that you can. And so with that, we're going to be covering my top 5 deck recommendations for you guys to run for today to be able to get the most upside out of the hot location. And so for the beginner or pool 1 players, we have a Khazar Zoo build. Now this early on in the game, you don't have a lot of cards that will be able to get a lot of usage out of the +2 bonus from Wakandan Embassy. But what we can do is if we run a deck that can flood a lot of that power onto the board on the last couple of turns, then we can get more upside out of it than our opponent. If we can play more cards that have received the buff than they can, then we can start out-tempoing and out-valuing what they can do. And so I have made a video on this build. I'll leave a link in the description below. But for this one, the idea is that you typically want to skip your first 2 or 3 turns. On turn 4 and 5, you start playing your ongoing cards to buff up your 1-cost cards at the very end of the game. And then on turn 6, you're going to drop and flood just about the rest of your hand onto the board. And so this allows you to get the most usage out of the bonus from Wakandan Embassy so that you can have that late turn power swing over your opponent. And so for the pool 2 build that I have, it was a little bit of a toss-up. I was between a discard deck that ran Swarm, because if Swarm gets buffed up, even after you discard him, he will retain that bonus from Wakandan Embassy, and then you'll be able to flood a lot of that power onto the board later on in the game. But I think that's going to be a little bit less consistent, and I think we're going to see a lot of really high power cards. So some really big multiple men, some big Black Panthers on the board. I think that a control style build is going to serve us better in pool 2 for today. And so with this list, we're running a kind of destruction package. So we have the Nova, Bucky Barnes, Carnage, Killmonger, Deathlock to be able to gain some early game tempo. And a lot of times we're going to be outpaced and outpowered until later on in the game. And that is where our counter cards come in. So we have Shang-Chi that can take out one of the opponent's really big minions or really big lanes. And then we have Enchantress, so if the opponent's still running things like Devil Dino, we're going to be able to find some upside in canceling out their ongoing abilities with our Enchantress. And so this deck, typically we will just play our destruction cards early on, and then as it gets later in the game, we start looking for our potential win condition lanes, whether that be an Angela that's been buffed up by Sentinels, and then you destroy your Nova to buff them up further. And then you're looking to swing one of the lanes from your opponent with your counter cards in Shang-Chi, Killmonger, or Enchantress. Now, as with most of the builds, pool 3 is where it really starts getting kind of fun and you start getting a lot of cards that you can make work really well with this location. And so the first one that I'm going to cover is a Black Panther build. And so Black Panther is our new season's card, and he has the ability on reveal, he's going to double his power. And so if Wakandan Embassy hits this card before he is dropped onto the board, then that is going to double that bonus, and you're going to be able to use this list to elevate that even further. And so this list has a pretty high curve. Most of the time, you're not going to do anything up until turn 3, sometimes even turn 4. And so there are a couple of win conditions that you can go with this list. It doesn't rely only on having Black Panther. If you don't have the ideal draw, sometimes you're going to go with a Thor into a Wong, into drawing Mjolnir. Maybe you do a Black Panther or a Devil Dino or an Arrow on 5, and then finish it off with either an Arnim Zola or a Mjolnir and an Odin to push 2 of those lanes in your favor. Another potential playline that you could have would be an Electro Ramp into a Black Panther on 4. You can then hit that with an Arnim Zola on 5, and then an Odin into the Arnim Zola lane on 6 will allow you to push a lot of power. And if the opponent cannot counter this, if they don't have something to stop you from getting through this entire combo, it's going to be really hard to compete with, because the Black Panther will end up being anywhere from 64 to around 80 power, especially if it has been buffed up by Wakandan Embassy before you started playing those cards onto the board. And then our next pool 3 deck is similar to the first pool 1, where you want to flood a lot of your power onto the board on the last couple of turns. Only this one, we have a couple of enablers to allow us to play our cards, return them back to our hand, and then continue to play them throughout the game so that we can continue to generate some additional upside for ourselves. And we can make usage out of some of the buffs with cards like Human Torch, who is going to start snowballing even faster. And so Typically, if he's moved once, he's going to double to 4 power. To move him again would push him up to 8. He's going to start at 4, so you're going to essentially get 1 free move out of him if he gets hit with the Wakandan Embassy location whenever that reveals. And so then you can start creating a really big Human Torch, especially if you move him a couple of times or if you bounce him and your Iron Fist back into your hand. And then the rest of the cards will just continue to generate value throughout the game. You have the Hood that you're going to be able to drop multiple times. The idea is that you drop several of your 1-cost cards. You can then either return them to your hand with Beast or with Falcon. And this is going to allow you to continue buffing up your Angela, your Collector, and your Bishop as you continue to play a lot of cards each turn. And on that final turn, you're going to be able to flood a lot of that power onto the board and position it where it's going to give you the best chance of finding your win condition. And then the last deck that I have to cover today is a Deadpool deck. And so with this one, similar to the Human Torch, if Deadpool gets hit with Wakandan Embassy, whenever he is destroyed, he doubles his power. If you can start with 3 power instead of 1, that is going to start his snowball effect much sooner. This could potentially create some really large Deadpools that are going to be really hard to compete with, especially if you combine that with either a Venom, a Hulkbuster, or a last turn Taskmaster, so that you can drop both Deadpool and Taskmaster onto the board. You're going to be able to push sometimes more than 100 power onto the board on that final turn, which is absolutely insane. And so this one should be one of the more consistent lists. If you don't draw into Wakandan Embassy, or even if you don't have the ideal draw, you're going to have a couple of late game win conditions with either your wave into a death and a Taskmaster combo, a wave to restrict the amount of cards your opponent can play, and then you just play a couple of your high value cards. And then with your destruction cards throughout the game, a lot of times you'll be able to maintain tempo over what your opponent can run. And so those are the 5 decks that I recommend trying out. Of course, experiment, tweak the decks to fit your playstyle or fit what you're seeing, what is going to be more advantageous for you. But let me know if any of these lists work well for you, or if you have something different that you're running. Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.